Welcome, everybody. I'd like to talk today about the great remembering that I feel that we're underway in now. And I'm still unpacking this, and I believe it's a co-creation for us all to unpack together. So here's some food for thought as we are now in Jupiter in Cancer in Vedic astrology. And this is all opening up to what I believe is a very important gateway for us for the Golden Age, where 2027 is posited as a biggie. And we are from the 26th of July this year, 2026, we're also coming into a dream spell new year of red galactic moon. And I want to plop those two things, Jupiter in Cancer and coming into red galactic moon and what I feel is happening. And I I often get these downloads or will look at the timelines and I see something and then I have to go on with my life as normal. And then suddenly I have like a process of remembering and I'm like, oh, I wrote about this. And this is what happens for a lot of us. And what I spoke about when I wrote the book Dakini Weaving, which we published 2 years ago, and it's really the timelines in it are all really destined for 2027 and beyond. So we've had a lot of students reading the book so far, but more and more people are going to be really finding the themes important for them that are in the book. It was written as a kind of time capsule. So 2027 is a biggie. And when I was writing the book, I was getting this insight that we were going to go into a collective process because galactic is very much about bringing things up an octave, number eight. It's also got a harmonizing property. And the red moon is very much about self-remembrance. But of course, it's also attributed to feminine yin qualities, nurturing, multidimensionality, like intuition being getting in touch with our emotions, all of those things. And water is normally seen as a feminine element. The moon is associated with waters. And of course, also epigenetics, the concept of epigenetics and the movement of our DNA, also the conductor of that is water. And the red moon is all about kind of the opening of the top of the head before we really tap into the full crown chakra. It's the process of self-remembrance. And interesting, Jupiter has now gone into Cancer, totally watery lunar energy, and Jupiter is exalted here. So when I was writing the book, I was talking about how it was going to be very important, this deep collective process. We've been doing a lot of ancestral work, but what I felt was that there was going to be something of a collective process as we examined the false constructs that surround us, and that there's a mutual process to undertake that then creates space and healing for the true attributes that we need to bring us into a golden age for those to unfold. And in recent days, I was doing a bit of an immersion. I do a pranayama immersion. I was doing lots of different things. And I suddenly found this outpouring via my Facebook wall and memes and shares of all these people, including a lot of people in male bodies, really speaking up about the legacy of the patriarchy. And this was definitely something that was included in my own musings, yet in this less formed way. And what I'm seeing in recent days is this unfolding of people speaking up just about the absurdity of kind of the engendering of everything, especially around biological function and the objectification of females and how that pervades in so many settings. The cycles of women not being honored, women being seen as neurotic, and there's so many men speaking up about this. And this is, I think, profoundly healing for so many people in female bodies when, a lot of us have been bullied over the years in different ways. And certainly if we're metaphysical women, that again, that intuition, that knowing, that gnosis has often been disdained, shunned, sent to the corner, invisibilized. And so a lot of us have gone, we're not even angry, we've put up with it. And this is again the role of people in female bodies is usually that we have to juggle more and we don't really get the recognition for it. And it's interesting because I've been thinking about how interesting that is when we look, especially in the West, as certain styles of spirituality that do and do not stick at the moment. And I think that in the West, because we have the karma of individualization and women have a lot more disposable income, these questions around women having to do like twice as much and the laziness of a lot of men, and then this thing that's happening with this kind of cooling off in a lot of romantic endeavors that's taking place as this realism hits about just how much inequality there is and how much that affects certain constructs. And so there's a guy who's doing these wonderful posts, Women Aren't Crazy, and just talking even about, perimenopause, childbirth, women's cycles, and how women, have to do the job of men often, and they're expected to do more, and then are called like lazy or mad because they try to speak up. And this is something we've also seen in a lot of spiritual traditions. And I was pondering recently on this objectifying of women. And there are a lot of women talking at the moment just about how woman is often just delineated into she needs to provide for me, and she's just there because the wiring, especially of young men, has been she provides for me, and she's just there to, I just get what I want, be it sex or her money or her attention, and it's not reciprocal. And I noticed this recently. I actually had an interesting experience some months ago. And I was like, this guy, and it wasn't romantic at all, but I was like, wow. And suddenly in recent days, I've seen what I was moving through, verbalized, of just these people who just want to take and just come in, just take my time. And then, the minute, similar to dealing with my father, the minute I'm on word three of any sentence, he's gone. And this is it, this wiring that has been around. Women are just there to provide, and that God forbid, they don't want to have sex with you or this or that. And I also want to say here, I love men and I have been around so many amazing conscious men. I'm not trying to slate anybody or anything. I'm talking about these constructs, the psychoanalytical perspectives, the biological wiring, and the constructs, especially since patriarchy as this kind of institutional egregore has come into play. And we've all been subordinated into that in our structures. And I've been looking at how it's very interesting when we look at even things like certain Dharma perspectives, where there's so much about needing to tame the ego, to subordinate to a guru. And I think that, and there's a lot of kickback at the moment that I'm seeing by a lot of women and the Dakini energy. And I've had my own little like ponderings on this myself in recent years. And over the last year, I realized I had to extract myself from certain settings because I realized I've had a lifetime of actually being objectified, not validated for anything I say or do, mansplained to, and all of those things. And actually, right here, right now, in terms of what seems to be unfolding in the collective, that function doesn't seem to be what's working for me right now. And it's led me to ponder on how a lot of these spiritual constructs for things like Dharma were always made for men, and men have this tendency to think that everybody's going to care for them. And if you go to most ashram settings, it's still the women cooking for the men, and so it's still happening. And what we've noticed in some settings is that unless it's a really large young female, a lot of the women are not validated or seen. And that's a necessary part of ego taming. But the thing is that women have gone through that all their lives already. Okay. And I'm definitely not saying we shouldn't tame the ego and continue to do that. But those constructs can actually be failing the spiritual development of females because actually they've had so much of that medicine that that's maybe not what they need to do to step into a deeper state of confidence with their own spiritual abilities. And so I've been looking at this weighting down that has, again, been from the perspective of the male wiring, and then how that's been played into these female domains, where actually sometimes that's not the medicine because that's what we've had: slap, 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 kick back, kick back, kick back, invisibilize, invisibilize. And of course, on the other side, we have this very manipulative pseudo-spiritual feminine that actually, for me, is like a colonial construct. It's like women wanting to dominate space, to magnetize through seduction. And I don't feel that that's the right thing for women either. I think that that's a kickback to a wound, okay? And I'm not going to go into that right now. But these things I just want to plop on the table to help you to start to look at the false floor, the false ceiling, because this is going to be very much this process that's unfolding in the coming times as we collectively remember, because there are so many brothers who are the voice of truth right now with this stuff. And I really want to bow down to them and salute them because for me, they are speaking more truth and more dharma than a lot of spiritual teachers I've seen out there because they're noticing these insidious constructs and how the sheen, this layer of it's how it is hasn't been checked. And we need the brothers to presence that. And I mean, this to me is like the sexiest bodhisattvas ever, okay? And of course, I'm not trying to objectify them, I'm joking there. But this is also something that a lot of women are really realizing that unless they're not into the Neanderthal thing, and there's some very funny comments out there, and what I want to get to is to actually move beyond any of this biological social stuff, but to talk about the necessity of why I feel we have to do something with this in this time is that the discussions on the duality around it and the investigation of this construct that has been presented through our script, scriptuality, textuality, belief systems or institutions, organizations, all predicated around certain biological functions. And, and I've seen this as well, is often in Dharma settings, the women will be told they're lazy and they're still doing 6 times as much as the men. And then the necessity of a woman to really hold her yin yang is often not understood. And everybody's supposed to be yang, 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 yang. Whereas again, if a woman has been changing nappies, doing 20 things at once for years, her ego is being humbled. And that part of her that just goes into the service, that's already activated. And what all of us need to do is not just be yang all the time. When we do certain retreats, we push people really hard because you have to push them out of the ego. But actually, so many of us have actually undergone a lot of that in society, in just the natural ashram of life. And again, there's still so many women, and all of us need to keep continuing working with the ego. But again, the framework has always been around masculine testosterone. For a man, go, go, go. Actually, they need to do that because they are more wired to be thinking about sex. And I was looking at this in an ashram recently when they were doing a puja, and it was all men, and women were chucked at the side. This was in India, and it was really rigid and boring. But I was like, I think that this is the way this is like this is because men have this testosterone flare up, and they've got to not be looking at the women. They've got to keep focused, and this is why we have this very performative but very rigid, formulaic form of worship because this has all been based around testosterone because they need that to try and stabilize the mind from all the kind of whoa stuff. And women don't necessarily have that. And then women are being told they have to keep up with these things that are pushed onto men as how they need to stabilize the mind or become more virtuous. But actually, nobody's looking at women's cycles and the ebbs and flows, and that the yin and the yang are really important for, especially for women, and that we shouldn't be in a race with the men. And we've seen a lot of women that we know like burn out, but then because there's, there can be reasons why they keep trying to chase that, but it's not. And then there's a kind of projection that you're not a good bodhisattva, you're not going to be enlightened unless you can kind of do this form of spirituality, which was what was depicted in the texts that never mention women. Okay. And therefore, you'll only get enlightened if you do it this way. And actually, women have been conducting all these enlightened activities and doing these things, and still invisibilized in these ashram settings forever. Okay. So there are these things to presence. This is the important thing I feel. Of course, when we go to deep tantra, the inner wiring is what is exceedingly important. But if we're already all navigating samsara through false constructs, we're never going to create the causes and conditions to actually move forward because we are perpetuating an even more insidious paradigm. And we need, especially for people in female bodies, if people want to say spirituality has equality, there needs to be more listening done to the way that women have intuited, because they are the ones who usually have a stronger intuition, is in a general kind of collective way of looking at things. And of course, that's been banished, and we've had all the witch trials and witch hunts for anybody who's got a voice or says anything that's remotely metaphysical. So, and the construct of patriarchy was like, we don't like the way you frame that. We don't like the way you have a voice. We don't like that you actually have that connection. So you are bad. And often these people may not have even been that person. They just happen to have a female body. And of course, a tremendous amount of work has been done in recent times with clearing of witch wounds, and it's become quite popular even in things like artistic, how do we say it, installations and very popular pieces of work, for instance, in Lancashire in recent years. But what we have to do, I feel, is that this is what's coming with the astrology, is this kind of zero pointing. And this is what's really timely, is seeing in the days leading up to Jupiter and Cancer. I started watching some of these posts, and so my algorithm was picking up on them. And a lot of people were saying, I've had 3,000 new followers this week. So it's a thing. And I can remember when I was writing the book, I was feeling it's going to be a really big process for everybody. We're going to collectively go into this remembering stage of the false ceiling and the false floor. And I knew there would be gender in there in some way. And this is why the book's called Dakini Weaving, because it's about reminding us all, we all have this. We all have the yin and the yang. It's our birthright to all be more spiritual, more intuitive. But actually, it's been women who've held that code. They've kept it outside of the rigid institutionalization of things. And until we really go into a very deep process where we see just how reality that we see as reality has been formed from the vantage point of those constructs, we can't get to the next stage. And the next stage is where it gets really exciting. So with the next stage, it's like what I believe, and I think that this is one of the reasons why we have a lot of people who now do not who are trans, who define themselves beyond just male female constructs, is that in our evolution, the evolution of the spiritual being is that we are not just, life is not dictated just by our biological function. And this is what's really evolving. This is one of the reasons why there's such backlash around women at the moment, is that women now have purchasing power. They're not just articles, they're not just kind of slaves to do housework and childbirth. And with that, women are starting to decide they don't want Neanderthal style relationships, and they're not going to put up with sexism. And similarly, we have this whole advent of big AI use. And so the whole relationship to labor is changing. And with that, we have a lot of fear. And this is why it's very important for us to do the gendered work first, and then to realize the emancipatory potential of what's on our doorstep is that if we can zero point just relating to each other with this undercurrent of biological function still being dominant, i.e., the carnal human, which is why, again, the manipulative sorcerers are usually doing it from sexual basis. It's lower triangle, lower chakra imbalances, okay? And that, of course, doesn't make men trust them. But we need to examine and really move beyond all of that because actually part of this activation has been shared in some of the more recent prophecies like the Uluru prophecy, is that some people would call it our Pleiadian consciousness. And whether or not you believe in that, it's a good way of saying an elevated spiritual consciousness in our DNA and in our being is activating. And I bet if Palladians exist, and if you spoke to them, they would think that there's an absurdity that's keeping us in this Neanderthal kind of setting that isn't part of the plan for our evolution to what people call Homo luminous, okay? And to what we might say is a golden age, is that actually, yeah, we have to get rid of all these false floors and false ceilings. And that also includes some of the old ideas of what the matriarchy was as well. And so we still have to fulfill our biological function, but it may be that we are to become these bodhisattvas who, and bodhisattva is not dominated by sex, okay? It's about dharma, good things, moving beyond duality, doing everything for the greater good and for all beings. And that has to move beyond constructs of inequality, right? And that's why we have to examine even the Dharma institutions that have only been constructed around that patriarchal lens, because I think not enough is being done in those settings. And the blind spots are really creating a lot of friction right now. And I'm seeing a lot of women speaking up about dodgy monks and this and that. And I think this is the kickback as the timelines, it doesn't really fit the timeline, especially for women in the West who have purchasing power, who are not just wired for survival like you might be in Tibet in the winter, okay? And this is something that I think is fascinating, is that I think we've got two timelines um, dancing alongside each other, and there has to be a mutual respect that we in the West and in certain countries and with certain privilege have different set of conditions. We should not project that necessarily on countries where people don't have mobile phones, they don't know where their next meal's coming from. And that serves its purpose in those places right now. But a lot of us who are kind of these multidimensional beings, we are the disruptors, we are the Aquarian age pioneers. And we have to examine the lens and the vantage point from which we looked at all of this. And and to realize we can't think any of it's really necessarily true for what we're going to go to. And with that, by starting to unravel from the patternings and those constructs, the deeper part of our spiritual nature will activate. And when we are no longer an object who's seen as something that you fuck, okay? And we already know that, but we have to step up. And this is why it comes to protect, first and foremost, the women. And secondly, the men who see our allies, is that it's incredibly important for us to emancipate in a safe way to let men then feel safe to do their part of the journey. Because I'm seeing a lot of these brothers saying, women just want to feel safe. And I get it and I agree. And but I also think that we have to look at that men, while when women feel safe, we need to then help men to feel safe. Okay. And yes, we all have some sort of gender that we identify with, and it's beyond maybe the two polar binary ideas that we had, and that's part of our evolution. And it's not really to define us anymore. yes, we'll know who's having the babies and things like that. But what we need to come out of is just seeing ourselves as our biological wiring, because that's all part of our samsaric self. And so we need to do the necessary work to overcome all the shards and the ancestral weirdness that we've inherited, which is what so many people are doing. And as we do that, then we are not defined by just the carnal human anymore. And what's happening as things like AI evolve is that if we don't look at it as, oh, it's going to take away my job, it's going to take away your job in a factory doing some robotic work, and actually you have time to then explore what it really is to be you, okay? And to be in right relation beyond being defined as an object of your gender, okay? And when we start to really crank up the Dharma relationships, where we're coming together for shared desire for a better world, the real Bodhisattva stuff, this is where the high tantras come in, where sex changes. It's so much more blissful. It's not about conquest. There's no dominion. There's no just peak moment. You're sustaining that. You're actually sustaining this higher spiritual essence. And you're seeing the God in the other, okay? And you're able to merge into that. And it can be done for incredibly amazing earth work and multidimensional work. And so, therefore, we need to look at all the constructs and unravel them to give space for this evolving spiritual dual boot system that we're going to have running with our Neanderthal carnal system. And this is what it is to be an evolving human, is to, as the prophecies are saying, is that these deeper concerns, which are from the heart to the higher chakras, they're coming online. So we have to stop identifying ourselves as just objects of sex and just think that everything's like a Hollywood movie and it's all about romance and this really wonky idea that perpetuates codependency and actually a lot of insecurity because people are wired from pain and wounding and power. So we have to examine all these constructs of dominion. And the first one to go is the patriarchy, but we also have to look at the shadow insidious qualities of old matriarchal systems. And this is where the omnidirectional human can come in because it's no longer just a vertical human. Okay, and this is again why certain spiritual traditions, it's all about guru, and guru is a really important function. And if you have the right guru, you'll understand that. But he's not the only function. And this is again why a lot of spiritual communities are collapsing because they put all their eggs in the basket of everybody's just so busy bowing to one person who's maintaining this thing that they don't actually maintain the community the right way. And then there's a lot of fallout because they haven't valued the interpersonal relating between the different Sangha members who are just as important as the vertical. Okay. So this is what I believe is really coming in as a deep, deep thematic for us all to work through. And also to see that so many of these ideals of what masculinity is and femininity is are they're not really the full answer. And so many people are just stuck in this kind of like, it's like youth club phase. And they call themselves spiritual seekers when it's all still just about picking up partners. I know a lot of people who are kind of like, kind of CEO type people, and then they've had like awakenings recently. But the way everything's still from a lens of wanting to pick up a pretty girl. And even they'll talk about like how beautiful their coach is, stuff like that. So we have to really investigate how that's even going into some of these pseudo spiritual domains and to start to speak up. And what I want to say is the beautiful thing is that we have these brothers and all these amazing women as well who've made it their life's work to study gender studies at university and things like that. And there's an incredible amount of good resourcing out there for you if you have felt somehow lesser or ashamed of being metaphysical, any of those things, because truly something is arising and people are speaking out. And I know that all of us who are metaphysical women, we've been told, yeah, just people saying horrible things. And somehow I know from having a father who has been like, just I wasn't the little submissive female object because I was a tomboy. I was actually a boy for 2 years of my childhood. I fully identified as male. Okay. And that, of course, bursts his bubble, me being this easy to subordinate little girl, okay? And tomboy, and, yeah, just lots of things. And I kept constantly, probably, he was constantly looking at me with repulsion. And that lasted for a long time. And he still can't finish a sentence. Let me finish a sentence. And I know my dad is a good person. And I know that all these men are good people underneath. And that's why I don't hate him for it. But that was why, for instance, in certain settings recently, I was like, actually, I've had a life of this. This is not the medicine I need. And I'm grateful for what that did to push me into place and not let my ego just erupt all the time and seek visibility all the time because I was kind of punished any time I even tried that as a child. And any good grades and stuff, nothing really. I learned how to do things because my Dharma told me to do it. So these things I've seen the great teachings that some of that have brought us, but we shouldn't be identified with that, and we should not have shame for being female and having a voice. And it's been very healing for me in recent times, especially when I think of the certain stages of bullying that I have endured. And I don't talk about these things much because I don't see myself as a victim. But recently, I did this coming out that's happening helped me to realize, how much I was like, I asked for it. It's like when people, were like, oh, I asked to be raped, it's my fault in some way. And then, it was about a year ago I started going, I was just a child. I didn't do anything to these people. And and suddenly, I was able to heal the final shards because I'd already worked with it. It never took over me. I was never identified by these things. And some people have had so much abuse. I've just had a homeopathic version compared to a lot. But it was like recently, I was like, yeah, what did I ever do to these people? And it's just this construct that has acted through people. And this is why we have to get rid of this insidious construct. I don't see my dad as an evil person. I don't see these bullies as evil people. But of course, it did affect certain ways that I would feel about, especially around very privileged men, because it was usually very privileged men from the bully sort of schools. They were the ones who bullied me. Okay. But luckily on the other side, I always had so many dear, very conscious brothers. And I'm so lucky to have had so many amazing brothers and partners who have been very supportive of females. And I wouldn't say I detect one iota of them objectifying me in those other ways. So, but I noticed how it had stopped me wanting to speak up about certain things. And I see so much of this, and these women who are speaking out online, and the men, there's so many people trying to shame them. And for some of us, if we have it in our astrology, we may have shame comes in, metaphysical shame from that we've inherited. And what's really important is that for us to actually to move beyond that. So I really want to give gratitude to all these beautiful beings who've been presencing this stuff because it helped me to just really look at the idiocracy of just how we've put up with this stuff and how we've not been allowed to speak up about just how crazily how would I say this? Disequilibrated, is that even a word? Um, that everything has been, yet, what these people are presencing is just how much women have achieved. With this gaze constantly trying to subordinate them. So yeah, so it's really interesting time. And I, as I say, I feel that this is not the end game. It's not about this kind of holy gender war. It's actually about the pulling away of the veil over the eyes to see fully. And then once you see, you can't unsee. And then to start to let those constructs fall away, because this is where the only way we can really start to approach what is true spirituality is that true spirituality is beyond gender, and it is beyond, and we have to look at the role of hormones in how it might make someone perform spirituality. And this is something I tried to speak up about a couple of years ago to somebody. It's like nobody's talking about the role of genders with spirituality, and they just kind of treated me like I was mad. Again, the stonewalling and the gaslighting. And I had to sit in my own little journey because I was like, yeah, I know it sounds really neurotic, but there's something in this. And yes, this is people all talking from the samsara realm, but the thing is that the ashrams are in samsara realm. The practices are done in samsara realm. It's like you can't apply it only half the time. We have to look at why certain practices are seen as the only way you do the practices, and start to include that actually maybe the females are having realizations. Again, women haven't been allowed to share their realizations. So you'll read the texts and it's all about these men with their high realizations, because the woman, she opens her mouth, just like what happens for me. 3 words in, she's been invisibilized. Okay. So the beauty is that women have actually cultivated very deep multidimensional lens. And we don't want to get a whole explosion of everybody sharing the realizations, because that actually makes the ego get stronger. But we can't just put on a pedestal the male realizations, which is what has happened because of the invisibilization of the females and the lack of entry points. Final thing is, what's very interesting is that not some, nearly all branches of Tibetan Buddhism, the women can't get ordination for certain levels, and it kind of evaporated. And if you speak to the men, there are no men that I see in those Dharma institutions who've made it their life's work to really help the women. And this is why I really bow down to the allies that we have, at least in Muggles world, presencing this stuff. Because, for instance, over the years of doing work with Indigenous people or Afro people, from the Afro-Caribbean, Afro-American, etc. I've seen that sometimes they need allies from privilege, okay? And I know people like Lyle June Johnson has done a lot of work on, how we can show up and support our Indigenous brothers and sisters. She said, be an ally. You go and help them at a protest against fracking, help them write letters, show up, help. And this is what I'm not seeing in some of these settings, is it's just like still part of the Vajra container. And it's like, and these people are not sexist who may be maintaining this. They're very loving of women, but they're still, you need to do a little bit extra when we want to tip the imbalance, okay? You need that advocacy. And that's why in some of these Eastern ways of spirituality aren't working right now for a lot of women, because the advocacy hasn't been showing up, and it's kind of like it's just your medicine. And if you look at how people are speaking out about cults, it's all very much what people would say could be seen as narcissistic. Yet these are these Vajra frameworks. But the thing is that unless the advocacy happens, it's still coming from the only the patriarchal lens. So I've had a little brain moment. So there's another little thread that's off there, and I didn't finish it, and I'm aware of that, but I don't know what it is now because I've gone on that little spaceship. So yeah, we have to come to this state of understanding and advocating where there has been inequality, that maybe the lens isn't just as pure. People will always say this is pristine. And he's like, well, it's pristine because you've all seen it that way and there were no women there. And this is back to the women not being ordained. And I used to think, okay, the men could be doing more to make this happen. But also, I was also saying, yeah, but the women need to remember this themselves and not have the men tell them how to do it. So the fact that it's been lost is actually that the next step is that women, in their own way, we need to find our own termas. We need to come to our own realizations, and to do that in shared spaces on our own. Because actually, the women are the ones who will remember that bit first. Okay. And that's why there's an absence of that, because actually the framework doesn't work anymore. It has kind of uh, gone into extinction, I would say, for the female. It doesn't have the karmic conditions. And I used to think, well, we need to advocate more to support the women to come in that door. And I really do bow down to all the lamas and Dharma protector beings and, yeah, Vajra beings who are supporting women. But actually, we also need to create the time, the space, and the containers for the women to remember in their own sovereign way and not to invisibilize it, not to somehow make out that it's wrong because it's not totally in that container that has only got patriarchal construct around it. So there's a lot in there, and I'm still, as I say, I'm unpacking still, but I've been sitting on some of this, of course, for several years because I wrote a book about it. But I'm really, really interested as we've now just gone through this little door of Jupiter into Cancer, and now we have this whole unfolding many months. Then what happens is actually then Jupiter and Ketu are going to meet each other in Cancer next year. So it's like, in terms of the karmic nodes, right now at the time of speaking, we have Leo and Aquarius sitting good here. And in a couple of months, and this is why we're challenging leadership. We have to disrupt old systems. There's this new kind of novel way of doing things that's coming forward, breaking from the past. Okay, and that's very necessary. And the next eclipse is from August. Got to be pokey and quite ancestral because this is it. This remembering, the door of remembering, starting to really come open. Again, we can't unsee stuff. And this is going to make even more destabilizations of old wonky power structures, which is again necessary because we have to have new leadership. Then from December, we then come into Cancer Capricorn axis. And this is where we have to make the new foundations together. And what's interesting is while we're in that axis for 18 months, we come into Jupiter and Ketu meeting each other in Cancer. And that creates this profoundly spiritual, expansive, yet kind of also, it's like dissolving the samsara of this. But right now, we have to start disrupting then the foundations, the questing for the new foundations, and really looking at what has true value in a new way. Okay, and to work together to do that. And then we have this spiritual influence for 4 months next year. We also have Saturn goes into Aries to start to create a new cycle, but then it goes back in to almost like pick up what needs to be tweaked before we fully go into that. So it's really on. And this is why so many people are feeling like I've got to speak up about stuff because we're being asked to disrupt. And so this is why I think that a lot of people who may not be neurotypical or may be, may have quite a lot of Aquarian energy in their chart, may have come out of certain settings or institutions recently because you're needed now. It's like some of us fully respect our teachers, our gurus, all of that. But actually, if we're a disruptor, you need to fulfill that function and to do it in a non-angry way where you realize that we can't do it with any sort of sense of wanting harm for anybody else. And that's why women have to do their healing and not to, it's not the manipulative sorceress. That's not helping men to be safe. It's about us really, really holding full Dakini Bodhisattva desire, but not this desire for this beautiful golden age. And we are the dreamers and the weavers, and we can assist all beings to be dreamers and weavers. And it doesn't matter what body you're in, but you need to be understanding the importance of the feminine being, the feminine parts of yourself. And as we can see, there's so many brothers who are the advocates and they speak so eloquently. And again, this is it. The new paradigm is that women are just flocking to those sorts of guys. Yeah. Uh, one of the men was speaking up about somebody who'd been criticizing what he said. He was like, "You're not for the gene pool much longer," to some dismissive, trolly comment. And actually, it's kind of true. This is it. We're going to go through this upgrade. And this is why we have to use our privilege wisely. If we are able to use AI and to labor save, is we should be doing that to assist equality for all beings. It's not about how much I have. We have to eradicate that. So, weaving weaving adjourned for now, and yeah, I really look forward to us all sharing on this. And we're going to be doing this quantum transfiguration series on this. And also, of course, you might just have come by this. And as I say, I'm still unpacking some of it. I don't pretend to know all the answers. I'm just hoping to provoke some shift and upgrade for all of us as we examine the lens of everything and to then move beyond. Let's remember that patriarchy doesn't mean man. Okay, I just really want to end on that point. Patriarchy is like a mechanism that's turned into its own egregore, that's become a runaway train that has now cited a lot of it's just basically the locus point for inequality on the planet. And there are plenty of men speaking up about that. So it's time that that construct has served its purpose, and all the prophecies point to that. The tribes of the world know that. So let's weave together. And I just want to dedicate any merit from this transmission to the alleviation of suffering for all sentient beings, the bringing in of a golden age within this lifetime.